I'm Dennis Hopeless.
I'm Kyle Strahm.
This is Kyle and Dennis record.
WandaVision, episode 5. So episode 5. This was the 80s. This is the Full House, Growing Pains.
Well, it was Family Ties. Other than the homage to Full House in the opening credits sequence that they did, it was 1,000% Family Ties.
Do you mean them sitting on a blanket?
Yeah, it was the Family Ties opening sequence.
It was a Growing Pains opening sequence.
The Family Ties had the painting, and Growing Pains had the images, like the backward images. So it was a combination of those with the Full House edition of them sitting on a picnic blanket with the city in the background. It's a little bit weird because I feel like those shows were far enough apart. Like they were probably on the air at the same time, but one was just starting and the other ones were ending. So I thought that was a little weird, but
I was fascinated the whole time because it was so 80s sitcom. I watched so much of that stuff that every time something happened, I was like, oh yeah, that's exactly what it was like. Like when they turned the camera around and showed the babies, and it was always really weird because it was a 2-camera show, and
right.
That would just be a pickup shot they'd have to take. So in Family Ties, was there a sex-crazed neighbor, or is that a riff on Mona or from Who's the Boss?
The sex-crazed element was from Mona from Who's the Boss, but she was also Angela's mother, so it's weird to think of her as the neighbor, even though she did live like above the garage or something.
Yeah. Man, I really enjoyed the weird 80s aspect of it. There was so much in the blocking and the camera work and the costumes and how bad the kids were at acting. Once again, they did a great job capturing all of that.
I don't think we appreciate how much better child acting is now than it was in the 80s. Because while I was watching it, I was thinking, they cast children that have no idea how to act, but you're right. It's because they didn't have to. Back then, you just had to be like precocious and be able to say the words. But they aged them up right quick.
They did. And they did that with Who's the Boss, with the blonde kid who, it turned out when he grew into a teen, could not act at all.
That is a common problem. It's interesting because DJ Tanner on Roseanne was like that, where like he could not hold his own as a preteen, and especially in the later seasons when he was supposed to be a teenager, like that kid just didn't have the acting chops. But he is now, as an adult man, on the Connors and has, like, I think has put some energy into learning how to act. Because it'd be strange if they cast you to just basically be a prop, and then years later you're supposed to hold your own with John Goodman, and that would be really challenging.
Yeah, it would. She was wearing like a flannel with short sleeves, or was that a Family Ties thing that I'm oblivious to?
All of their costuming was Family Ties. The way the house was all wood, and the way they dressed in a lot of flannel and denim, because in Family Ties they were old, super progressive hippies who had now grown up, and their teenage son was like a Reagan Republican that was really into business and money. And so they dressed like in that sort of like casual granola style of the early 80s.
The title of the episode, A Very Special Episode, which if you are too young to have watched countless sitcoms, whenever they had a heavy subject to talk about, they would say, on a very special episode of Growing Pains. And then they'll talk about, or maybe on that episode, Mike Seaver's friend will get shot and die, or somebody will be addicted to drugs.
Or if it's Different Strokes, the children get molested by the man that runs the bike shop. That's
yes.
The most disturbing special episode ever made.
Was that Webster?
No, it was Different Strokes. The Gary Coleman show where the kids go to live with the rich white guy.
Man, they nailed it when they had the lesson. They played the music, like Danny Tanner talking to his kids. It was good. They did a good job.
So Wanda's clearly losing control because, number one, the seams are starting to show it within the TV structure. So like there's the aspect ratio is no longer matching to what's going on, and the video quality comes in and out and stays in like modern HD for most of it. And also the children don't listen to her, like, because they're not people she's controlling, they're constructs she's created, and they seem to have powers of their own. She can't control them, and that's really like upsetting. And then you combine to that Vision starting to figure out what's going on. Like, we can really see that this imaginary land that Wanda has created is falling apart during an episode where the themes are a little heavier. She's really trying to teach these things, but they don't line up with the world she's created at all.
Right. Her lesson was about how you can't change things and how you just have to let bad things happen.
Despite the fact that their dad is a dead android who shouldn't be there.
Yeah, I laughed when he came in and was washing his hands or whatever, and he's like, "So I talked to my coworker. I dropped the veil over his consciousness, and he's in a lot of pain because of you."
My favorite part of that sequence is so she runs the credits. He starts coming at her, and she runs the credits as though she's just going to be able to change everything and move. And he follows her out from under the credits to the other room, and then they have like the big fight where they power up, and that's cool.
Mm-hmm. When Agnes comes in and she's like, "You want me to do that again, or you want me to change that up a bit?"
Which is interesting, because that furthers the idea that Agnes is not just a normal player in this, because it seems like from what we saw with normally, like, even though they're aware somewhere deep in their consciousness that they're involved with this, they normally can't break through and say it. So like, what is Agnes's role?
Mm-hmm.
Is she Agatha Harkness from Marvel Comics, or is there something else going on with her?
And then, of course, Quicksilver.
I watched it Friday during the day, so I knew there was some big thing happening. That was clear from social media, but I had avoided spoilers, so I didn't know what it was. And the moment she started talking about Pietro, I got excited. Like, they better use the fucking good Quicksilver. Like, immediately whenever they started talking about her brother, because after X-Men Days of Future Past had come out, but before Age of Ultron had come out, I was at a Marvel retreat, and I pitched a Quicksilver as the Flash book. I said Quicksilver was the guy that stole the show in the X-Men movie that everybody loves, and he's going to be a big character in the MCU going forward because Age of Ultron's coming out, and so we should do a book where, like, you just make him the Flash. Like, he's a really cool character. You just kind of use that movie version of the character and play on it. And Dan Buckley, who's like one of the bigwigs at Marvel Publishing, was like, I wouldn't get too attached to Quicksilver in the MCU. And Dan Slott pops up, sticks his fingers in his ear, and says la 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 la, and leaves the room because he didn't want anything from the movie he hadn't seen yet being spoiled. And so that is how my shot at writing a Quicksilver ongoing was killed. So from a personal standpoint, it was very exciting to see that someone finally agrees that that character in the MCU would be. He's by far and away a more interesting version of the character than the one we saw in Age of Ultron.
Yeah, he is. And I didn't watch it until Saturday. And so I got even more spoilers, but I had put together that somebody was going to show up and it would be somebody from Fox. But I had seen a random tweet about adamantium and vibranium, and I was like, oh, it's going to either be Magneto or Wolverine. But I was way off. But I was glad. I liked him. I like that guy.
Yeah, he's great. I mean, he's one of the bright spots of those X-Men movies, which started out really strong but became a little shakier as they went on, I think. But he was always really good. I like that actor a lot too. He's in American Horror Story. But yeah, that version of Quicksilver is more interesting. In Age of Ultron, and it's not the actor's fault, but they just didn't do that much with it. He dies and Wanda's the one that comes out the other side of it. But also what I loved about it is the last time we saw Quicksilver in an X-Men movie, it was the 80s X-Men movie, the Phoenix one. And so
that's funny.
An 80s version of Quicksilver is showing up in the 80s episode, which is cool.
Yeah, that is funny. I didn't see the Phoenix movie. I think that Future Past was the last one I saw, or Logan. But that scene with him was really nice. Very good.
His voice is funny. Like, his accent is amusing because Wanda is from whatever weird European nation they made up.
Sokovia or something.
Isn't that the thing that they lift up into the air in Age of Ultron and try to drop?
I think it is. I could be wrong.
There's some other Easter eggy stuff that's fun. Like at one point, Monica Rambeau says that she knows, I don't remember what the exact terminology was, but she implied that she knew that Reed Richards could build that thing for her.
I missed that.
I'm not positive that's what she's saying. She starts to text somebody when she's talking about what she needs to go back into WandaVision. She said she needs this thing built with all these specifications, and then she like has a light bulb moment. She's like, "Oh, I know a whatever science person who could do that." And I think that might be a Reed Richards thing. I mean, also maybe not.
The cat's out of the bag. They've started. They're gonna pour all this Fox stuff in now. Yeah, I keep waiting for Reed Richards. There was a commercial during the Super Bowl yesterday that I thought was a Fantastic Four teaser. Do you have any idea what I'm talking about? It was a SpaceX commercial for something called Inspiration. It looked like a movie teaser about an astronaut taking a experimental trip into space, and the astronaut had a big patch on this at Inspiration, but the A in Inspiration was a 4 with a blue circle around it. And it was like, check out the Inspiration 4 website. And I was like, what? And I thought it was a viral teaser for Fantastic Four. Turns out it's a SpaceX actual space mission that they were advertising during the Super Bowl. But I'll send you the image, but it looks a lot like a Fantastic Four thing.
It's funny, all this pop culture stuff is old enough now and powerful enough and big enough that it inspires real scientists to do real cool stuff. It's like even like the Space Force thing being like a clear Starfleet ripoff. Because that's what we picture in our minds, like in our collective mind's eye, we picture all of this, 60s science fiction whenever we do this stuff, as it becomes science fact, I guess. I saw somebody, it was Brett White, who writes about WandaVision and other things for the Decider.com. He was tweeting out yesterday that Monica Rambeau's 60s costume, the thing that is made out of Kevlar apparently, has the same white neckline with blue underneath as the Fantastic Four costume, and that the sword emblem with the sword and the circle looks like a 4, which doesn't make a lot of sense because it's Monica Rambeau. Like it may just be a coincidence, but there's just so many different things you can read into this. Even I had forgotten about this when we originally talked about Sword, but in the comics, Sword is a mutant-run organization because it's run by Abigail Brand, who's a mutant. So the space stuff is tied to mutants, and obviously Wanda and Pietro were originally Magneto's kids and mutants in the comics. So they could be going all sorts of different directions. Like this could be leading to Multiverse of Madness, and she's just tapping into other universes, or this could be a reverse House of M situation where at the other end of this, we get mutants. Because if you notice the scene when they were talking about whether or not she's a terrorist, and they were running through her origin story, it's really vague and seems like maybe we're missing something. So like if they play that up and have it be a thing where she was always a mutant and the world just doesn't remember, that could also be a total MacGuffin. And I really liked the conversation about breaking the accord about using vision as a weapon, because the guy that runs Sword was saying that Wanda had broken all these rules. But I think what the FBI guy was suggesting is that what the hell were you guys doing with Vision? Because he was all taken apart.
Right.
And Sword was potentially violating that.
And how does that guy know Vision's living will?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
That guy's terrible. He's like the FBI guy in Die Hard, I think I've said before. His decisions are awful. I don't know if I liked her coming out and confronting them or not. It was a good conversation. She was certainly fearless, so I think that's a clue to her power set. Right. She had the confidence none of those people were going to shoot her.
Well, and seeing her not playing the role that she's trying to play and just being the badass, angry woman that's like, this is the only place that I can exist and be happy is in this bubble, so leave me alone. And not acknowledging, but there's thousands of people stuck in there with you that are terrified.
There are so many clues like this now with bringing in the other Quicksilver, the Doctor Strange movie being called Multiverse, and that Spider-Man movie with that they keep casting all the different Peter Parkers from the past, I think it's pretty clear we're going to get into some. What was that? What was that Marvel story where the army of Thors protected Doctor Doom? What was that called?
Secret Wars.
Was that it? Where all of the universes can join strangely? I think that's how they're going to do mutants, like you described. But what I also think, and this is going far off the path we're on, I think Multiverse of Madness is going to bring vampires into the MCU, and that's how Blade is going to be introduced.
Right.
They announced his movie who knows when, 2 years ago, a year ago, I don't know.
Makes WandaVision a really interesting thing. The reaction to the show has been varied from what I've seen online. I think for the most part, people are digging it, but I've seen people who say they're watching it almost as like a decoder ring more than a television show that they like. Like the drama is not internal baked in drama to the plot. It's mostly drama about like what are they going to reveal and where is the MCU going forward. And I enjoy the show for what it is, and I like the experimentation of it. But my girlfriend watches it with me, and she has seen some of the Marvel movies. She hasn't seen all of them. And I never know how much to stop and explain, because I think the Quicksilver reveal works even if you don't really understand the way in which he's been recast. Because they talk about how she's got a dead brother and she's not supposed to bring dead things back to life. So I think in like the internal logic of the show still works, but if you don't know the extra layer of that, how interesting is that ending? Are they just playing to people who already love the MCU and have seen all these movies multiple times? Or are there more casual fans who are still into it?
They absolutely are trying to appeal to everyone because it's Disney and it's their first MCU show they're launching. Until you just started talking about it, it didn't really occur to me that with the rules we've been given, not knowing that Disney acquired Fox and all that meta stuff, that could just be a guy from the town,
right,
that she's brought in and flavored as her brother or whatever. The fun of the show is the same fun I had when The Force Awakens came out,
right,
or watching The Mandalorian, because these properties are so, they live so long because there's so much cooked into them, and we like to dissect that because we have this huge knowledge of all the
right.
bullshit we're into. The best ones exist on both levels. I've heard people hate The Mandalorian, but that's impossible for me because I'm always like, ooh, look at that. And I feel like this is probably the same way to some degree.
At this point, I think most of the people that make this stuff are, if not super fans of the stuff, they're at least experts in it because they did all their research to get there, right? Like if you listen to Elizabeth Olsen talk, she can talk to you all about House of M and the 80s Avengers, West Coast Avengers run and all that stuff. Like she knows the character in the comics really well, even if she didn't before. And so I think making it, all of those nods are there. And as someone who worked at Marvel for a decade, that's what it's like being at Marvel. Like in order to not redo old stories and contradict or whatever, you become more engrossed in it even than you were as a comic fan. So you're writing from a like insanely elevated knowledge base and trying not to write comics about old comics. Well, they've created so much continuity in the 12 years, 13 years since Iron Man. They've got the same problem that they in the TV shows and the movies that they did in the comics, where there's so much continuity now that you can't expect someone to know it all. But a lot of people do. These things are wildly successful. Like very many people who are watching this have obsessively seen and watched and rewatched all this stuff. So if you ignore the continuity, those people who are your base are going to be angry. But if you lean too heavily into it, new viewers are going to be, what the fuck is happening?
And I think they're using Wanda and her reality warping ability and all these multiverse storylines that are clearly coming
Right.
to solve that problem. The best solution I've ever seen to that was in the J.J. Abrams Star Trek movie, where they go back in time to Kirk and Spock, and a couple of things happen, and then they're like, now we're in an alternate timeline. And I was just like, oh, that was super smart.
In the Days of Future Past X-Men stuff, they did the same thing. I think because J.J. Abrams pulled that off of Star Trek, they're like, oh, we can tie this in to the older adult X-Men stuff we've seen, but it doesn't have to be exactly the same because stuff changed, and now we can go forward. Your other option is to do what they've done with Spider-Man or Batman in the past, which is just relaunch it over and over and over.
Mm-hmm.
And that was one thing when media was presented and then went away. But now you can own 8K Blu-ray of every Batman movie that was ever made and have already seen and know that. They can't just show us a new one because it's been 15 years. Yeah, it's just weird. It's like this massive comic book problem that has existed forever of continuity is now just a world problem. Like because all of these franchises from Star Trek, even Lord of the Rings, like The Hobbit is a children's book that could have easily been made into one movie, but they put a lot of energy into tying it into the Lord of the Rings movies and building up Sauron and making it a prequel and all of this stuff to give it that same feel, because you're not just making like a one-off movie about hobbits, you're tying into the world of Lord of the Rings.
Dennis, do you have any other thoughts on WandaVision episode 5?
I'm just really excited to see where it goes. There's a weird tonal switch that's happening now that they're going back and forth. And I think in order to make that less jarring, the outside world stuff is a little bit less dark than it maybe would be otherwise. Like it feels a little poppy at times, even though like what they're dealing with is big and scary. The characters are kind of not sitcom-y, but sitcom adjacent. And I'm wondering if as WandaVision world gets darker, if that will get a little bit darker too.
I kind of feel like they popped out comic relief characters and put them together, and that's why it's all poppy.
For sure, but it feels like Ant-Man, where the characters that are taking it seriously are kind of the dumbest characters and nobody really likes them, even though what's happening would be really scary in real life.
Sure. Yeah, it's not played for being scary. I mean, it just feels like the Marvel movies. They're the same veneer that those have. Well, I'm looking forward to seeing where it goes. I like this show. I am really looking forward to a rewatch at some point after I've seen it all. I'm fascinated to hear Monica Rambeau's dialogue when she first shows up and talks about the job she was helping with, and seeing how that ties into everything we've learned. And I'm sure there's stuff that we have no idea that is right in front of our faces.
Yeah, that's the fun thing about it. I mean, it really does feel experimental. And, a lot of things that we love from the past were not perfectly executed out of the gate and we're finding their way. And that's what's so great about it. Like Star Trek Deep Space Nine takes a season to figure out where it's going, but it is the most unique. Well, it takes a minute. But it found the characters as it went along. And this is like trying new things. And I think the ideas are bigger and better sometimes than the execution in it, but I'll take that all day long over a super slick, super well edited thing that's something we've seen 1,000 times.
And I like how short the episodes are because you can just watch them real quick and then it's not an ordeal.
Yeah, like we said before, they can do lots of different tones with these shows and really build the Marvel Universe out in a way that we haven't seen before, because it doesn't have to be blockbuster, amazing, massive. It can be something else. We want to hear your thoughts, and we're going to do a live stream for the final episode for sure. So prepare yourselves for that and start the conversation in the comments.
Dennis, you can be found on Twitter.
Yes, I'm on Twitter at Hopeless Dent. I'm on TikTok at Missouri Swagger, where I put some clips from this up. And I'm on Instagram at Dennis Hopeless Comics. And wherever you saw this, you can talk to me in the comments. Where are you to be found, Kyle?
You can find me on Instagram, Kyle Strahm _, on Twitter at KStrahm, and on Facebook. So thank you, everybody. We'll talk to you soon.